All right, let's dive in. Today, we're going deep into the world of AI doctors.
AI doctors. Sounds pretty futuristic.
It does, doesn't it? But it's closer than you might think.
Oh, really?
We're actually going to be looking at a paper from the University of Miami Business Law Review to help us navigate this.
Okay, and what's this paper all about?
It's called, get this, the AI-Robotic Prescription, Legal Liability, when an autonomous AI robot is your medical provider.
Wow, that title's a mouthful.
It is. But it really gets to the heart of what we're talking about, the legal and ethical challenges of having AI in healthcare.
Right, because if a robot's making medical decisions,
Exactly. Who's responsible when things go wrong?
it's not like you can just sue the robot.
Well, that's where things get interesting. Some people actually think we should be able to, but before we get too far ahead of ourselves,
Let's back up a bit.
this paper starts by making a really important distinction between AI and robotics.
Yeah, because those terms get thrown around a lot, but they're not exactly the same thing, are they?
Not quite. So think of AI like the software, the brains of the operation.
Okay, the brains. So, like an algorithm that can diagnose a disease from a scan.
Exactly. And then you have robotics, which is more about the hardware.
Like the machines that actually perform tasks.
Yeah, so a robotic arm used in surgery, for instance. But here's where it gets really interesting.
Okay, I'm listening.
We're starting to see AI being integrated into robotics.
So you're saying robots are getting smarter?
Way smarter. We're talking about autonomous medical devices that can make decisions on their own.
I see where this is going. More autonomy means more questions about who's calling the shots and who's responsible when something goes wrong.
Exactly. And that's one of the big things this paper tries to untangle.
Like the whole black box problem, right?
Yeah, that's a big one. AI can be really good at making decisions, but it's not always clear how it arrived at those decisions.
Right, it's like, okay, you say I have this condition, but how did you get there?
You'd want to know the reasoning, wouldn't you?
Absolutely, especially if it's a life or death situation.
And that lack of transparency, that black box, it makes it really difficult to determine where an error occurred and who might be responsible.
I can see how that would be a nightmare from a legal standpoint.
Definitely. But before we get into all the legal complexities, I think it's worth taking a quick look back at how robots first enter the operating room.
Yeah, how did we even get to this point?
Well, believe it or not, the first robot-assisted surgery actually took place back in 1985.
Wow, really? That early?
It was a brain biopsy using a robot called the PUMA 560.
Huh, the PUMA 560, never heard of it.
It wasn't exactly a household name, but then things really took off in the late 1990s.
Okay, what happened then?
That's when we saw the introduction of laparoscopic robotic systems like the Da Vinci.
Ah, the Da Vinci. Now that one I've heard of.
It's pretty famous. It allows surgeons to perform complex procedures through tiny incisions.
Less invasive, faster recovery times. Sounds great.
It is. But the surgeon is still in control, manipulating the robotic arms from a console.
Right, so it's more of a tool to enhance the surgeon's skills.
Exactly. But things are changing fast.
Oh, how so?
In 2016, a robot called the Smart Tissue Autonomous Robot, or STAR for short, actually sutured a pig's intestine autonomously.
Hold on, autonomously. It did it on its own.
And get this, it actually outperformed human surgeons in the task.
Wow, that's impressive, I think.
It's both impressive and a little unnerving, to be honest.
I can see that.
Because it really highlights the potential of AI in surgery, but it also raises all these questions about how much autonomy we're comfortable giving these machines.
Right, because with more autonomy comes more responsibility. And if a robot messes up...
Who's to blame?
Exactly, who's to blame?
That's a question we're going to keep exploring in part 2 of this deep dive. We'll delve into the legal frameworks surrounding AI in healthcare and try to untangle some of those thorny questions of liability. So where were we?
Oh, right. Robots potentially making surgical errors. And that brings us to the legal side of things.
Yeah, the legal stuff can be a bit of a headache sometimes, but it's important. It is. Especially when you're talking about AI in healthcare.
Because our laws, well, they were written for human doctors.
Exactly. Not robots. So how do our existing legal frameworks even apply to this?
That's the million-dollar question. The paper we're looking at spends a lot of time discussing this, how traditional legal concepts like medical malpractice and product liability might apply to these, AI medical devices.
But I'm guessing it's not a simple answer.
Definitely not. Let's take medical malpractice, for example.
Okay, medical malpractice.
It usually comes down to whether a doctor deviated from, the accepted standard of care.
Right, right.
But how do you apply that to an AI?
Yeah, that's a good point. What is the standard of care for an AI doctor?
That's one of the big challenges. I mean, can we even hold an AI to the same standard as a human physician?
Hmm, I don't know. And even if we could, how do we measure that?
It's uncharted territory, legally speaking, and then you have product liability,
Which is all about holding, who is it again? The manufacturers, right?
right? The manufacturers,
Yeah.
holding them accountable for, defective products.
But AI software is constantly learning and evolving, so how do you determine if there's a defect?
That's the tricky part. Can you sue a company for a design defect in an algorithm that's always changing? It's a tough one.
It really is. Do you think we need, like, completely new laws to deal with this?
I think it's a real possibility. The paper argues that, yeah, we might need laws and regulations specifically designed for these autonomous medical devices.
I can see that. Because this isn't just like a theoretical problem anymore, is it?
Not at all. There are already lawsuits happening. People have been injured by medical devices, and these cases are highlighting just how complicated this whole issue of liability can be.
Especially when AI is involved.
Exactly. It adds a whole other layer of complexity.
The paper also mentions this idea of giving AI legal personhood.
Oh, yeah, that's a fascinating concept.
Is that even possible? Like, could you actually sue a robot in court?
Well, some legal scholars have proposed this idea. Basically, if AI had legal personhood, you could sue it directly, just like you could sue a corporation.
So instead of trying to track down who's really responsible, you just take the AI to court.
That's the gist of it. But personally, I have some concerns about that.
What kind of concerns?
Well, for one thing, even the most advanced AI, it doesn't have, like, the moral capacity, you know what I mean? Or the consciousness that we associate with, well, with being a person.
That's true. It would be kind of strange to say a robot is a person in the eyes of the law.
It raises all sorts of philosophical questions, doesn't it, about what it means to be a person.
It does. But okay, so if giving AI legal personhood isn't the answer, then what is?
Well, the paper suggests a different approach, a new regulatory system that's specifically tailored to these autonomous AI medical devices.
Okay, so what would that look like?
One idea is a system that considers the level of autonomy a device has. You know,
So like the more decisions the AI makes on its own,
the higher the potential for harm.
and therefore the greater the responsibility
Of the manufacturer, probably.
so more autonomy equals more liability.
In a nutshell, yes. But we also need clear guidelines on who's liable when an AI device does cause harm. Is it the patient, the doctor, the hospital, the manufacturer, the AI itself? All these questions need to be answered.
Yeah, we can't just brush those questions under the rug.
Absolutely not.
You mentioned the FDA earlier. What role do they play in all of this? I mean, they're the ones who approve new drugs and devices, right?
Right. And they're definitely trying to keep up with this whole AI thing. They've already cleared hundreds of AI-powered medical devices.
Oh, wow. Hundreds.
Hundreds. But they're also working on developing a more comprehensive framework for regulating this tech because it's evolving so quickly.
So they're not just letting any AI into the medical world.
Not at all. They're taking what they call a total product lifecycle approach. So they're looking at these devices from development all the way through to how they're used in practice.
Well, that's good to hear. At least they're trying to stay on top of it. But this isn't just the FDA's responsibility, right?
You're right. This is going to require a team effort. The FDA, lawmakers, even the courts, they all need to work together to make sure this technology is being used safely and responsibly.
And ethically, too. We can't forget about the ethical side of this.
Absolutely. It's a huge part of the conversation.
Well, before we get too deep into that ethical rabbit hole, I think it's worth mentioning a few important legal cases that have really shaped the way we think about medical devices in general.
Oh, yeah. Good point.
This paper talks about something called the Medical Device Federal Preemption Trilogy. Have you ever heard of that?
Of course. These are landmark cases. They've really defined the legal landscape when it comes to medical devices.
Okay, so before we get into those specific cases, can you just explain what federal preemption means? I have to admit, it sounds a little intimidating. So can you break down this federal preemption thing for me? In plain English, please.
Sure, sure. It basically means that in certain areas, federal law is the boss. State law has to take a back seat.
Okay, so in the world of medical devices.
If the FDA gives a thumbs up to a device, a state can't come along and impose a bunch of extra rules.
Gotcha. So these three cases, they help us understand how that whole preemption thing works when it comes to medical devices.
Right. So the first case, Medtronic v. Lore. This was back in 96.
Okay, 1996.
The patient got injured by a pacemaker, claimed it was defective.
So naturally they sued, right?
Yep. But here's the thing. The pacemaker had already been approved by the FDA.
So the question was, did that FDA approval protect the manufacturer from the lawsuit?
Exactly. And the Supreme Court said, not necessarily.
Okay, so the manufacturer wasn't completely off the hook.
Nope. The court said that state law claims are okay, but only if they don't clash with federal requirements.
So you can't contradict what the FDA has already decided.
Right. The states can't just go rogue.
Makes sense. What about the second case in this trilogy?
Okay, so that one's Buckman v. Plaintiffs Legal Committee from 2001.
Okay, Buckman, 2001.
This one's a little different. It involved accusations of fraud against a device company.
Fraud, huh? Like they were trying to pull a fast one.
Essentially. The claim was that they misled the FDA to get their product approved.
Sneaky. So what happened there?
Supreme Court said those state law claims were preempted.
So in that case, the manufacturer was protected.
Yeah. They basically said, look, if you're alleging fraud against a federal agency, that's a federal issue. The states need to stay out of it.
Interesting. So you can't just sue a company under state law because you think they lied to the FDA.
Exactly. It's got to be a federal case.
Got it. Okay, last case. Tell me about Regal.
All right. Regal v. Medtronic. This one was in 2008.
Okay, 2008. And what kind of device are we talking about here?
It involved a catheter.
Hmm.
And this catheter had gone through the FDA's pre-market approval process.
Pre-market approval. That's the toughest level of review, right?
The most rigorous. They really scrutinize those devices.
So this catheter, it had basically gotten the FDA's gold star.
Yep. And the Supreme Court decided that when a device has gone through that level of scrutiny, state law claims are preempted.
So basically, once the FDA has given that pre-market approval, the states can't step in and add more requirements.
Right. The court basically said if the FDA's already done a thorough review, the states need to trust that process.
It sounds like that pre-market approval from the FDA is a pretty big deal for these companies.
It definitely offers them significant protection, but it's not a get-out-of-jail-free card.
Right. There are always exceptions.
Exactly. There are still some situations where a company could be held liable even with that FDA approval. But those cases, they get really complicated.
Especially when you throw AI into the mix.
Oh, absolutely. AI takes all these pre-existing legal issues and turns them up to 11.
Because an AI device, it's not static. It's constantly learning and evolving.
Exactly. So a device that was totally safe when it got FDA approval, it could theoretically become dangerous down the line as the AI learns and changes.
And who's responsible then? The manufacturer, the hospital using the device, the doctor who's relying on it. It's a tangled web.
No easy answers. Plus, you've got the whole black box problem on top of that.
Right, if an AI messes up, it's not always easy to figure out why.
And without that understanding, it's really hard to pin down who's responsible.
It sounds like the intersection of AI and healthcare law is going to be a busy area for a long time to come.
Oh, yeah. Lots for lawyers to sort out in the coming years.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground today, from the basics of AI and robotics to the complexities of legal liability and the ethical questions swirling around it all.
It's a lot to wrap your head around.
It is, but it's such an important conversation to be having. I mean, we're talking about the future of healthcare here, and whether we like it or not, AI is going to play a big role in that future.
Absolutely. It's not a question of if AI will be a part of healthcare, but how.
And it's up to all of us to figure out how to integrate it responsibly, ethically, and safely.
Couldn't agree more. This is a conversation that involves everyone. Doctors, patients, ethicists, lawmakers, tech experts. We all have a stake in this.
Well, I want to thank you for joining us today for this deep dive into the world of AI doctors. And to our listeners, keep those questions coming, keep those conversations going. The future of healthcare is being shaped right now, and it's going to take all of us to make sure it's a future we can all feel good about.